And away we go for the war summary for live stream 121 for June 8th to June 14th, 1917. And I'm going to say this, I've recorded the ATA previously, and it's neat now to see the difference in tone of the Allied newspaper versus the ones that William Aarons supplied with the material from. Anyways, here we go. I think I talked about it in the ATA, but anyways, here we go. The war summary. Striking British advances were recorded in General Haig's reports yesterday in what is generally known as the Wytschaete salient, the first on a front of 9 miles from a point southeast of Ypres to Ploegsteert Wood, north of Armentières, the second on a 5-mile front carrying Oosterwern, the village of Wytschaete. I think, darn it, I looked it up too. And the German positions east of the village over an extent of 5 miles. Hold on, let me see if I can do that again. The village of Wytschaete, I think it's Wytschaete. Up to 4:30 yesterday afternoon, over 5,000 prisoners had passed through the collecting stations and many guns were taken. The ground gained is of great importance now, as well as in regard to the future plans of the Allies for driving the enemy out of northern France and beginning the reconquest of Belgium. It includes the Messines-Wytschaete Ridge, which has dominated the British positions in the Ypres salient. The ridge is only about half as high as the Vimy Ridge, but is recognized as a key to the northern section of the West Front. The ridge commands a very wide stretch of territory, and the German High Command had evidently counted upon it being held indefinitely. Roughly, the British attack may be said to be a drive between Ypres and Lille, with the capture of the latter city and the famous Auvers Ridge in view. At the same time, it may be considered in the light of the larger scheme of outflanking German positions in Belgium, as well as those of important points in France. Renewed and particularly heavy bombardments of the Belgian coast may be looked for should the advance be maintained, as well as a renewal of the British attack in the Arras sector. And there will be a keen anticipation on the part of many of a landing on the Belgian coast. Interesting. The present battle is, in a sense, a renewal of the Arras battle, and the next few weeks will show to what extent it will be spread. The Germans are claiming renewed successes against the French on the Aisne front. The French are recording the repulsive attacks there, and the Belgian reports speak of increased artillery duels on their quarter of the line. It is believed by military experts that the French will shortly launch a new and powerful attack, coordinating with the present movement of the British. To the Second Army, commanded by General Sir Herbert O.C. Plumer, fell the honors of a day of hard fighting and brilliant success. General Haig's reports of the victory are, as usual, modest and restrained. They are an effective answer to the outbursts of the blasphemer of Potsdam, who, as reported in dispatches, I wonder who they're talking about, in dispatches published on June 4th, declared that the British and French offensives had failed, adding, "The Lord be praised, glory for his help, and thanks for such magnificent people in arms. God will be with us further." Interesting that they bring up the God stuff with the Pentecost article of the ATA that William Aarons provided. It is not the first time that the Kaiser's boastings have been followed by stinging defeats, and one can imagine even his own people sticking their tongues in their cheeks when they read them. The first German official reports of the action received during the day made the stereotyped claim of repulsing all British attacks, but the night report admitted the loss of some sections of the Wytschaete salient, which is the usual German way of confessing a serious defeat. Unofficial but censored dispatches from British headquarters show that the attack, which had been in course of preparation for a considerable period, was carried out on a scale unsurpassed even in this great war. Not the least of the factors in inaugurating the successes won was the explosion of more than 1 million pounds of high explosives placed in a score of more of mines in the foe front, which is what I think happened last Saturday in our time. After months of laborious mining and sapping, Premier Lloyd George was called to hear the explosion at London, about 140 miles away, as the plans for the attack were carried out on a schedule known to the Premier. The largest number of guns yet concentrated on a given area, a wonderful smoky barrage during the attack, and the famous tanks all aided in the smashing of the enemy trenches and the routing of his troops. Prussian militarism gave the world many shocks and surprises in the early days of the war. On a considerable sector of the ground over which the fighting is spreading, Canadian troops in 1915 and 1916, outgunned and outnumbered, fought and held on, suffering grievous losses. Yesterday, their comrades of the British Isles, Ireland, New Zealand, and Australia brought to bear all the devices of war of which the Germans once held the monopoly, and some the arrogant warlords had never dreamed of. The antidote was too strong for the Kaiser's forces, whose dream of forcing their way through the British lines to Calais has now been shattered forever. Holy shoot. What a heck of... that was awfully flowery, wasn't it? United States warships have arrived off the coast of France, with Pershing aboard too, escorting a wheat-laden vessel. The French, as well as the Allies, regard this as another striking indication of the intention of the Americans to get into the fight. Oh my God, I just found out this as well. I didn't realize the United States are not actually an official ally in the sense they're not part of the Entente allies, I think. They're like fighting still separately, but in other words, I don't know, like it's interesting to find out about that. I'm just reading a little bit, but it's neat. Austrian claims of important successes against the Italians, including the recapture of positions on the Carso, are offset by Italian claims of repulsing another great attack launched with very heavy forces. There is no doubt that the Austrians have captured many Italians and retaken some ground, but it does not appear at present to be of great importance. And as Percival Gibbons said in a recent vivid dispatch to the Globe, the Italians have the habit of victory. Well, until Caporetto shows up. Additional reports of the British victory of Thursday, official and unofficial alike, show that its importance has not been exaggerated in any particular. It was a win of magnitude in which every arm of the service played a part. Striking testimony to its importance comes in the German official report, which admits the loss of Wittscheite, Messines, and other points, and speaks of a withdrawal into positions between the bend of the canal north of Halebeke and the Douve Basin, west of Warneton. This line may not be held by the Germans, despite their talk, as behind it are the Comine Canal and the Lys River. Another successful advance by the British would mean that the foe would be compelled to retreat across waterways under conditions of peril. It is not unlikely that the enemy will prefer to continue his retreat farther east. The redemption of Belgium and the freeing of France will not be speedy accomplishments, but they are well begun. A report that cavalry is again active against the Germans is of interest. Yeah. Of 6,400 prisoners have been taken by the British, the ground consolidated, and several German counterattacks have been repulsed, according to last night's British official reports. It is stated in various reports that the depth of the British advance was nearly 3 miles. German dependence upon the machinery of war has received a rude shock as the result of Thursday's fighting. For more than 2 years, the enemy had worked almost incessantly to strengthen and maintain the Messines Ridge. He had applied the lessons of the bitter experiences of the Somme and Arras battles to the problem of making stronger still a position he already considered to be impregnable. So that would have been last Saturday, our time. And then he lost it in a day because the British, whom he once despised, I'm sure he still does, have shown themselves to be more than a match in devising weapons of warfare, not only to meet the best that the German could use, but to make the best of no avail in the hour of testing. Proof of the state of efficiency attained by the British in the weapons and the art of war is carried in all the phases of the latest success, and in none more than in the statement that the losses were light. Readers of the Globe will realize the significance of this if they read carefully the official British report relative to the defenses of the Position 1, published elsewhere in this issue. General Haig's daily reports have rarely devoted more than a few lines to such details as are given in this report. It is as if he were trying to emphasize its importance and to tell the Empire and the Allies in a quiet way that the improved weapons, explosives, equipment, and above all, the brave men he commands are now, in his position, in opinion, more than equal to the tasks that still await them. It would appear from the dispatches that no great counteroffensive is immediately in prospect, though this may come at any time. Insofar as the Messines Ridge positions are concerned, and they are the most important, the British would seem to be well prepared, having already placed many guns on the ridge. Crown Prince Ruprecht, who commands the German army on this front, used to fill alleged neutral correspondents up with fine stories of the impossibility of turning his men out of their positions. His report yesterday admits withdrawals to a prepared nerve position and says the English today were unable to continue the attacks. There is every indication that the British had not planned to renew the attack, being busily engaged in consolidating and fortifying their gains. French forces may soon have to bear the brunt of a tremendous offensive by the enemy in an attempt to save his face following his defeat by the British. Southeast of Saint-Quentin and on the Aisne front, faux artillery bombarded the French lines with great violence, and in the former sector made attempts to leave their trenches in order to attack. These, the French reports say, were frustrated. There's no reason yet for abandoning the idea that the French have a big attack in preparation, and careful reading of the reports from day to day justifies the conclusion that the German activity is based on the hope of defeating this plan in its inception. Hold your horses. And away we go again. Major General Pershing, commanding the United States Expeditionary Force for Europe, and his staff were accorded a tremendous ovation on their arrival in England yesterday. They made the journey on a ship escorted by United States destroyers. The publication of news of their arrival will no doubt be quickly followed by the report that big sections of the fighting units of the Expeditionary Force have landed. Indeed, some may be in Britain now, and 100 aviators have already arrived in France. These events are an indication of the earnestness of our new ally, who is building ships, raising armies, and loaning money to the Allies with a speed that is commendable. Reports that Austria has sent a peace mission to Russia probably have a basis in truth, though they may be denied. Austria has everything to gain by an early peace. She has suffered much since she set about with a light heart to whip little Serbia. The Italians again report the repulse of further enemy attacks on the Carso. A great German counterattack lasting from 7 o'clock in the evening until midnight on Friday against the 6 miles of the newly won British front was completely repulsed after a struggle of intense violence. Particularly fierce are the words applied by General Haig to the fighting in which the foe aimed to recapture the important Messines Ridge. But he says in concluding his report, our troops retained possession of the whole ground captured by us since the commencement of the battle. Unofficial reports from correspondents at headquarters say that in the struggle, Klein-Zillebeke, a part of the new line, was lost, but was later retaken by the British. It was established that the enemy's attacks were made with fresh divisions of reserves, which means that the German High Command put so great a value on possession of Messines Ridge that it dared to jeopardize other plans and stake its future needs in men in an attempt to wrest it back. Some ground was gained yesterday by the British south of Ypres. The position along the Scarpe River was improved, and further raiding was carried on over many sections on a wide front. The number of prisoners taken in Thursday's battle now totals over 7,000, and the booty increases with the passing days. It would not be surprising if the enemy should make a withdrawal of some extent from the sector now that the inevitable counterattack has failed. The German reports do not mention this attack. On the contrary, an effort is directed to making it appear that the British were the aggressors and were thrown back in attempts to continue their advances. The people of Germany are still being kept in the dark as far as is possible in respect to the losses their armies are suffering. Canadian battalions have made a record raid on German positions around Lens, penetrating the foe trenches to a depth of more than a half mile on a 2-mile front, holding the ground for observation purposes for several hours and returning with 150 prisoners after wrecking the enemy defenses with high explosives. This operation was conducted in an area nearly 20 miles south of that in Belgium, in which the British struck such a brilliant blow on Thursday last. The raid followed an earlier attack by the Canadians, for some elements of trenches near the Souchez River, and which apparently it was desired to gain in order to wipe out a strong German flank defensive point. Success here was obtained after stiff fighting, some of it hand-to-hand, and the ground at latest reports was being held very steadily. The ground around Lens, a coal mining center, is being won from the foe, and the capture of the town itself, or what remains of it, may be flashed at any time. Despite the destruction the Germans are carrying out in the area, resumption of coal mining would not be long delayed once the Allies got possession. On the other fighting fronts, there is little of importance to record. The struggle between the Italians and Austrians has abated somewhat, although the calm in this area is not likely to last long. The Austrians have been very strongly reinforced. Like the German armies facing the British and French, they have benefited to a very marked degree by the quiescence of the Russians. Scouts of the latter are displaying some activity in the Carpathians, but it is too soon to count upon that as a prelude to a movement on a large scale. President Wilson's message to the Provisional Government of Russia, made public today, which I would like to read, in which the aims of the United States in the war are clearly set forth, may aid in infusing the Russians with the spirit essential to keeping the solid pledges by which they are bound to the Allies. But to the long-distance observers, it would seem that the Russians are more concerned with discussions than decisions on the battlefield. Hold on. All right. Well, this didn't take long, did it? There is certain liveliness now on the French front that may presage the expected attack on a grand scale, and each side is doing its best to discover, if possible, where the blow is to be attempted. In Macedonia, the field of mystery, artillery duels, and aerial combats on a scale large enough to deserve mention in the official dispatches are recorded. There is still considerable anxiety among Allied experts as to the Salonika expedition and the part it is destined to play. The same was true for many months in respect to the British Expeditionary Force in Egypt, which some time ago invaded Palestine and in Mesopotamia. No one is pessimistic about either of those expeditions now. Good news comes from the Italian and British fronts today. In the case of the former, General Cadorna's armies have struck a shrewd blow in the Trentino region, gaining considerable ground southeast of the city of Trent, one of the chief objectives of the Italian campaign as a whole, and capturing more than 500 prisoners. The fighting here, the scene of a big Italian offensive earlier in the war, was in the mountains. Nearly the whole of Monte Ortiagara, 6,924 feet in height, being taken by the Italians and some past positions of importance being occupied. Last year, there was great cause for anxiety over the campaign conducted by the Austrians in this quarter. For some time, the Austrians, aided by Germans and with an amazing concentration of artillery, smashed their way towards the Venetian plain. At a time when it seemed that they were about to obtain great successes, General Cadorna's counterattack developed in an unexpectedly striking manner, the tables being completely turned and very heavy losses in men and material being inflicted upon the enemy. It was to the credit of the Italian staff that they held their ground in other sectors while dealing with this phase of the fighting. This time, the Italians have abandoned, for the moment, their offensive on the Carso, which is Trieste as its objective, while repelling all the latest counterattacks and retaining most of the ground won. At the same time, they have launched the new attack referred to in the retreat at Trentino. It is not as yet clear whether this is to be developed or whether it is intended as a feint to draw Austrian troops from the Carso Plateau. In any event, it shows that the Italian army has reached a stage where it confidently conducts attacks at widely separated points upon a powerful foe entrenched in positions to which the word impregnable has often been applied. General Haig sends one of his brief but illuminating reports. The British, he says, have captured another mile of German trenches southeast of Messines, together with 7 field guns and a number of prisoners. Following the failure of the German counterattack on Friday night, this advance by the British is an indication of their power to continue to shove the enemy farther east toward Lille or Douai. As the line to which the Germans fell back from the Messines position now stands, it has still behind it, or on a greater part of it, the Lys River and the Comines Canal. It is still on the cards that the Germans may withdraw across the two waters mentioned rather than risk disaster on a larger scale than that which befell them in the Messines Ridge battle. As usual, the German reports claim the repulse of the British attacks. The German staff, it would seem, has no other policy at present moment than to continue to hide from the whole people at home the losses of positions and men recently suffered on the West Front. No fighting of importance is recorded on the French front, though official reports from that quarter still emphasize the very active artillery duels in the Belgian sectors, that is, the area near the coast. Great events may be announced any day from this quarter. An Admiralty drifter of the Dover Patrol, in a smart action yesterday, destroyed 2 out of 5 enemy seaplanes, capturing the pilots of both. German seaplanes are sharing with the Zeps and the airplanes a constant succession of defeats. The stories from the British headquarters of the great work accomplished by the aviators in General Haig's recent big victory are another indication of the tremendous growth in numbers and effectiveness of Britain's aerial service. Canadians await with some interest further details of General Byng's removal from command of the Canadian forces at the front. It is generally believed that he has been promoted, to a higher command, and there is some hope that a Canadian officer may succeed him. King Constantine of Greece has abdicated on demand of the Entente allies. This is mind-boggling. Wait until we read this. Holy F. This is the outstanding news of the day. Remember, a neutral country. Remember Belgium. That's all I got to say, man. The King and Queen Sophie, with the Crown Prince George, it is said, will leave on an Allied warship and proceed to Switzerland by way of Italy. This is a minor detail. The outstanding fact is that, after a period of vacillation and delay on the part of the Allies, the King at last has been brought to book. Almost from the beginning of the war, Constantine, backed by his queen, a sister of the Kaiser, has been actively engaged in taking every possible step to thwart and delay the Allies, to threaten their communications in Macedonia, and to encourage those of the Grecians who agreed with him in placing every obstacle in the way of reconquering Serbia, a former ally of his own country, and which ally he basely deserted in the hour of its trial. On several occasions, the Allies have taken more or less drastic action against the king and his supporters, but these warnings have not been taken to heart by Constantine. The matter has apparently been brought to a head by the discovery of some plot or action by the king, of which no mention has yet been made, and by the necessity of securing for the Greeks who have joined the Allied forces a share in the harvest of the country. Good Lord. For a long time, it has been apparent that civil war in Greece or the removal of the king to a sphere where this pro-German activities could not find vent was bound to come. Or you could have just left Greece alone. When Venizelos, after exhausting all constitutional means to keep the king to his obligations and promises, raised the banner of insurrection, a goodly portion of the Greek forces joined him and went over to the Allies after taking possession of a number of important islands and other strategic points. These men have already shown their mettle in action against the Bulgars, the Turks, and the Austro-German polyglot combination that has invaded not only Serbia, but with the connivance of Constantine, has taken possession of parts of Greece. Yep, just like Italy did this week, by the way. Bulletins received last night say that there has been no disorder in Athens or in the districts of Thessaly occupied by Allied troops for the securing of the crops. It would not be surprising if Greece were now to declare for the Allies and enter enthusiastically upon the task of assisting to drive the enemy out of its own territory, like maybe Italy, and out of Serbia, and aiding in operations destined to sever connections between Turkey and her Teuton allies. With Greece on the side of the Allies, Turkey would not long remain a factor in the war. General Haig reports another advance in the Messines region, this time to the northeast, the British occupying 2 miles of enemy trenches in the hamlet of Gaspar. It is obvious that the Germans are not to be allowed any time to rest in this sector, but are to be pressed with the utmost vigor. The British also record a slight advance of their line astride the Souchez River, presumably in the operations against Lens. There is great activity on the part of the German artillery around Lens and Ypres. From the three widely separated points come stories illustrative of the decreasing terror of the German U-boat warfare. Mr. Paulin, a noted British naval critic who has arrived in New York and whose articles are said to have had a good deal to do with bringing about the reorganization of the British Admiralty, makes the assertion that the British have been sinking the three submarines a week, and in 1 week sank 6. He says that the Germans turn out about 3 new submarines each week, so that their losses and output are approximately equal. Mr. Paulin is not in a position to say to just what the success against the U-boats is attributable, but hints that mining explosions outside of the ports of departure have something to do with it. Major Murat, a noted German critic, tells his countrymen that the U-boat warfare is not succeeding and also uses some frank language against those who belittle British successes on the Western Front. Mr. Gresti, a special correspondent of the New York Times, who has returned to England after 3 months of absence, declares that conditions in regard to food and living are better than they were, or at least not worse than they were in March. This, he thinks, is due to the voluntary economizing by the British people, as well as to the increasing success against the U-boats. On the French and Italian fronts, there is little to record. The Austrians claim to have repulsed all the Italian attacks in the Trentino sector, while on the French line, the day was marked generally by increasing artillery duels. Hold on again, goodness gracious. Oh, here comes the big second big air raid in a week, I do believe. Wednesday was a German day. There was very little fighting on land, most of the actions being of a long-range nature. But the Germans scored in an aerial raid over the east end of the outskirts of London, while the weekly record of shipping losses was not nearly so satisfactory as those of several previous weeks. In the air raid, according to a statement made in the comments by Mr. Bonar Lara, nearly 100 people were killed and 439 injured. These numbers may be added to when more complete details are received. Boy, I said in the ATA it was something like 70 and 100 and whatever injured, so holy cow, did I ever get that wrong? Nothing is known yet as the result of the fighting that took place between the British aviators and the German raiders, or as to whether any of the latter were engaged on their return to their base. It will be remembered that in the last airplane raid, a number of the German machines were brought down as they were nearing the Belgian coast after returning from England. During the course of the raid over London, a school was struck by a bomb, and 10 children were killed outright and 50 or 60 injured. No damage of a military character was inflicted. Nevertheless, there is no doubt that the nation that rejoiced in the murder of women and children on the Lusitania and had a medal struck to commemorate that feat will see in the killing and injuring of school children something to boast of. On Monday last, the Globe published a story from British headquarters giving a detail of some of the splendid accomplishments of the British aviators in the Messines battle. No finer work has been done during the course of the war than that by these airmen who attacked battalions and batteries and rival aviators wherever they could find them. No greater contrast has been afforded of the different views of the two nations than that shown by the raid over London and the raid of British aviators against the German army at Messines. It has been the policy of the British government to deprecate the idea of constant reprisals and punishment for such raids as the enemy carried out. But there is in Britain a growing feeling that in no other way is it possible to make the Germans understand that such raids can be repaid in kind. It is not unlikely that the demand for such punishment will later reach a stage where it cannot be ignored. As usual with the British people, while many sought whatever points of safety were available during the raid, thousands regarded it as an entertainment for their benefit. I know. And unofficial reports say that the roofs of hundreds of buildings were crowded with spectators trying to get a glimpse of the raiders and the machines that went up to fight them. Good Lord. I would like to know, though, if the British had or the French had actually targeted civilian, did aerial raids and did civilian targets or something before. That would be interesting to find out. Anyways, oh my God, we're in the last one. British ships sunk by submarines during the week, total 22 of over 1,600 tons. 10 under 1,600 tons, and 6 fishing vessels. 23 British merchant vessels were unsuccessfully attacked by the submarines. Last Wednesday's statement recorded a total of only 23 vessels sunk. against the 38 announced yesterday, which was the largest of any for a month past. It may be that the theory of the pessimist who attributes previous decreases in sinkings to the fact that the German submarines returned to their ports to refit as some ground, but it is probable that the increased losses are due to increased efforts on the part of the submarine fleets. The Germans would no doubt redouble their efforts at this time in the hope of sinking some of the officers and men of the American staffs that are going to Britain and France. There's nothing to be gained by belittling the U-boat warfare, but unless the British leaders and the critics of neutrals, as well as allied nations, are woefully mistaken, the chief object aimed at, namely of starving Britain into surrender, cannot be attained. General Haig reports the number of Germans captured since the morning of June 7th totals 7,342, with 47 guns and 242 machine guns. In Greece, the new order of things seems to have been accepted without any trouble. Troops of the Allied nations continue to occupy portions of Thessaly without opposition, and it is evident that there is to be no drawing back. With the announcement of the advance of the Allied troops in Greece comes a statement of violent artillery activity and skirmishing on the Vardar front. This may be an indication that General Sarray, who commands the Allied forces in Macedonia, now feels that his flanks and rear are absolutely protected and that he is free to make a supreme effort to break the foe line. Canadians beat off a German attempt to retake a strong machine gun position recently wrested from their near Lens, the attack being made after heavy artillery fire. The grip on Lens is tightening, and it's also the end of the show. And hopefully that went well. I hope you have a great remainder of your weekend and a great week, and I hope to see you for live stream 122. All right, that's it.